My name is Layla, and I was 18 years old on the day my entire world fractured like glass struck by a hammer. It happened on September 7th, 2018, inside the Grand Council Hall of our palace, a place I had entered hundreds of times, but never as a prisoner. That morning, I walked into the room as a daughter of the royal family. By the time I stepped out, I was a bride to be with my father as my groom. I can still hear the echo of my grandfather's voice as if the marble walls never stopped vibrating from his decree. He sat at the head of the long carved table, surrounded by uncles, scholars, and generals. Their robes glowed under the golden chandeliers, but to me they looked like judges in a trial where my sentence had already been decided. My grandfather did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every syllable sank with the weight of ancient authority. "It is decided," he said. "For the purity of our bloodline, Layla will marry her father. The ceremony will be arranged immediately." My stomach dropped so violently that I thought I might faint. I remember gripping the edge of the table to steady myself. My father, Imran, sat to my right. He didn't speak. His jaw tightened. His eyes flickered with pain, but he did not protest. He had been raised to obey, just like me. And now obedience was devouring both of us. I tried to breathe, but my lungs felt like they had turned to stone. The room suddenly seemed too small, though it was larger than most homes. Perfume from my aunts, incense from the doorway, the faint metallic smell of polished gold, all of it mixed into a suffocating haze. I heard my own heartbeat crash against my eardrums, loud enough to drown the scholars' murmurings as they quoted traditions and legal justifications. Words like honor, lineage, and duty floated around me like arrows seeking a place to land. Honor, lineage, duty. I wanted to scream, "What about my soul?" But no sound came out. My father finally looked at me. His eyes were full of a grief he couldn't speak aloud, not in front of the council, not in a system where he was both prince and prisoner. That silent apology in his eyes was somehow worse than anger. It told me he would sacrifice himself for tradition, even if it meant sacrificing me. In that moment, something inside me cracked. I felt the shattering. The Layla I had been, the quiet, dutiful daughter who bowed her head and held her tongue, collapsed right there on the marble floor of my heart. Grandfather dismissed the meeting with a wave of his hand, as if he had just signed a trade agreement, not condemned me to a lifetime of psychological incest. The guards opened the heavy doors. Sunlight spilled in from the courtyard, bright and ordinary, mocking the darkness filling my chest. As I walked out of the grand hall, every step echoed like a countdown towards something I did not yet understand. I thought that day was the end of my innocence, the end of my future, the end of me. I had no idea that years later I would look back on that very moment and whisper to myself, that was not the end. That was the moment Jesus began to write my new life. I grew up in a palace built to impress the world, yet it failed to convince my own heart that I was truly alive inside it. From the outside, our home looked like paradise marble courtyards veined with gold, fountains that never stopped singing, and guards who stood so still they looked carved from stone. People believed I lived the dream every girl wished for, but my reality was far different. I was a princess made of glass, fragile, polished, admired, and always on display, but never free to choose my own shape. My earliest memories were not of toys or laughter, but of lessons. Tutors came to me before I could even read. They taught me how to walk with silence, how to smile without showing too many teeth, how to lower my gaze at exactly the right angle. I memorized poetry before I understood its meaning. I recited Quranic verses before I understood their weight. Servants dressed me in silk, braided my hair until my scalp ached, and positioned my hands just right when guests visited. Everything from my tone of voice to the rhythm of my breathing was choreographed long before I reached adolescence. People assume that royalty means freedom. They do not see the iron bars hidden behind the gold. In my family, tradition was sacred, and a daughter was not a child, but an instrument, an offering to political alliances, a symbol of purity, a piece in a game that had begun centuries before my birth. My mother used to say, "Your life is not your own, Layla. It belongs to history." She said it gently, not as a warning, but as a resignation. I did not realize until much later that those words were her way of telling me she had never belonged to herself either. My mother died when I was 13. Her illness came suddenly and ended quickly, as if she had slipped through life like a passing breeze. I remember her lying in bed, her skin pale, her breath short. She smiled at me one last time and whispered, "Forgive us, forgive this life." I did not understand what she meant, but after she was gone, the palace changed. The softest part of my existence disappeared. I lost the only person who touched me with tenderness, who saw me as a daughter instead of a duty. My father Imran loved me in the only way he knew, quietly, distantly, bound by the same traditions that bound me. He was a man raised to obey, raised to bend under the weight of lineage. When he smiled, it was always with a shadow behind his eyes. I did not blame him for anything. He was a product of the same prison. If anything, his sorrow taught me that chains can be inherited like jewels. After my mother's death, the expectations around me intensified. I was groomed with a kind of precision that felt more surgical than educational. Every morning, I woke to a schedule that dictated every moment. Quran recitation, poetry memorization, speech refinement, etiquette drills, physical composure training, historical lineage study. I learned about kingdoms rising and falling, about royal marriages forged for power, about bloodlines that must remain unbroken. All of it was taught with the same cold certainty. This is your destiny. But inside me grew a quiet rebellion. Not a loud, dramatic anger, but a soft, persistent ache, a whisper that said, "There must be more than this." I would lie in my enormous bed, staring at the carved ceiling, wondering why my heart felt so empty while my surroundings were overflowing. Why did luxury feel like loneliness? Why did obedience feel like suffocation? Why did the palace feel less like home and more like a beautifully decorated cage? There were days I tried to convince myself to be grateful. After all, millions of people would trade places with me in an instant. But envy from the outside doesn't fix emptiness on the inside. I attended galas where people bowed to me, yet no one truly saw me. I walked through gardens bursting with roses, yet I could not pick a single one without permission. I was allowed to exist, but not to live. Sometimes, late at night, I would sneak to the rooftop. It was the only place in the palace where no one followed me. There, under the desert sky, I would finally breathe. I would talk to the stars, whispering the questions I was never allowed to ask aloud. Who am I? Why was I born? Why do I feel trapped when everyone says I'm blessed? The wind never answered, but at least it listened. Those rooftop nights planted the first seeds of rebellion, not the dramatic kind people write in books, but the quiet kind that grows slowly in the heart. I didn't want to destroy my family. I didn't want to shame my father. I just wanted to be human. I wanted a life where my dreams mattered as much as my lineage, where my heart had value beyond political strategy, where I could choose love instead of being assigned a role in a dynasty script. I did not know it then, but those whispers to the stars were the beginning of a journey that would one day lead me to cry out to a very different sky. And someone would finally answer. The weeks after the council's decision became a slow strangulation of my freedom. From the moment I stepped out of that hall, it felt as if the palace walls tightened around me inch by inch. Guards who once nodded politely at me now shadowed my every move. Doors that had always been open suddenly required permissions. My phone was taken for security reasons. My university attendance was suspended until further arrangements. I became a prisoner draped in silk. My grandfather claimed it was for my protection. My aunts whispered that it was for my purification, but I knew the truth. They were preparing me like a lamb for sacrifice. Every gesture, every restriction was meant to mold me into the obedient bride they demanded. The bride of my own father. I watched my father shrink under the same pressure he became, quieter, more withdrawn, unable to look me in the eyes for long. He tried to smile sometimes, but it was the smile of a man drowning while pretending he still had breath. I did not hate him. I hated the crown on his head that weighed so heavily it crushed both of us. If he could rebel, he would have. But he was bound by invisible chains, stronger than any metal. Loyalty, fear, and centuries of tradition. My desperation grew like a storm inside me. Every morning, I woke with the same thought. You must escape, but escape was impossible. I was watched day and night. Even in my own bedroom, I felt eyes on me. Once, when I tried to slip out to the garden at night, 2 guards appeared from nowhere and escorted me back wordlessly. Their silence frightened me more than shouting would have. I tried to plead with my grandfather, but he dismissed me with a gentle, infuriating smile. You were born for this, he said, as if I should feel honored. I tried to talk to my aunts, but they scolded me for questioning tradition. I even tried asking a scholar if the marriage was truly necessary. He quoted verses and genealogies until my mind felt like a maze without exit. Every attempt to find help closed another door. The more trapped I felt, the more fiercely something inside me fought back. I didn't want to be brave. I didn't want to start a rebellion. I just wanted one part of my life to belong to me. One decision, one breath of freedom. That breath came from a place I did not expect, my heart. I had a boyfriend at university, a quiet, gentle young man named Sammy. We had kept our relationship hidden because we knew it would never be allowed. He was kind, thoughtful, nothing like the men in my family who carried power like weapons. With Sammy, I felt human. I felt seen. When I learned I would be forced to marry my father, he was the only person I wanted to run to. One night, in a moment of panic and longing, I managed to sneak a message to him through a sympathetic maid. I wrote only 4 words. Please meet me tonight. He came. He came even though it was dangerous, even though he could have been killed for it. When he held me, I broke. I sobbed into his chest like a child who had finally found a safe place to fall apart. I can't do it, I whispered. They want to marry me to my father. I can't breathe, Sammy. I feel like I'm dying. He cupped my face in his hands, his eyes burning with a mixture of fear and love. Then let's leave, he said. Right now, we'll run. We'll go anywhere but here. But we both knew fleeing the country was almost impossible. Borders were watched. My passport was locked away. The royal family had eyes everywhere. Running was a fantasy, nothing more. And that was when the wildest, darkest idea entered my mind, an idea born from desperation and a need so deep it felt like survival. I realized there was one thing that would make the marriage impossible. One thing that would corrupt the purity they worshipped more than God himself. Purity. My purity. If I became pregnant, I would no longer be fit to marry my father. I would become a scandal, a flaw, a contamination of the bloodline they worshipped. It was reckless. It was dangerous. It was unthinkable, but it was mine. The night I made that decision, my heart was pounding so loudly I thought the walls would expose me. I didn't see it as ruining myself, I saw it as saving myself, saving my future, saving my soul. And so, under the cover of darkness, Sammy and I crossed a line that changed everything. It was not a moment of lust or impulse. It was a moment of resistance. A moment where I seized control of a life that was never supposed to be mine. A moment where I whispered to myself, you will not be their puppet. You will not be their sacrifice. Weeks later, when I discovered I was pregnant, I collapsed on the bathroom floor with trembling hands pressed against my stomach. Tears streamed down my face, not only from fear, but from hope. For the first time, I carried something that belonged entirely to me, a heartbeat that defied the kingdom, a tiny life that whispered, you are not powerless. My belly became my rebellion. My child became my freedom. My body became my only voice. But freedom, I would soon learn, comes at a price far higher than I ever imagined. For 6 months, my secret lived beneath my heart like a quiet miracle. Every flutter, every gentle kick felt like a whispered promise that I was not alone no matter how dark the world around me became. I wore loose abayas, avoided mirrors, and learned how to hide my nausea behind polite smiles. Every day was a game of survival, every hour a new fear. But my child, my rebellion, my freedom gave me the strength to keep breathing. Sammy and I planned to escape as soon as my belly became too large to hide. He contacted a friend who knew someone at the Jordanian border, someone who supposedly could help us slip through. It was risky, nearly impossible, but we were desperate enough to believe in impossibilities. The night we ran, the desert air felt heavy, as if the sky itself warned us not to go. But we went anyway. We waited until the palace slept, then slipped into the back of a taxi driven by Sammy's friend. I sat with my hood pulled low, my hands shaking over my swollen stomach. Every streetlight felt like an accusation. Every passing car felt like a threat. Halfway to the border, flashing blue lights appeared behind us. At first it was distant, like a star rising. Then it grew larger, louder, closer. My breath caught. The taxi driver cursed under his breath. Sammy grabbed my hand so tightly it hurt. "It's okay," he whispered, but his voice trembled. It wasn't okay. The police surrounded us before we could even think. Doors yanked open, hands pulled us out. Sammy shouted my name before they struck him hard enough to drop him to his knees. I screamed, clutching my belly, begging them not to hurt him. They dragged us apart like tearing paper. My cries meant nothing. My tears meant nothing. I was not a girl to them. I was a possession being retrieved. Someone grabbed my chin, forcing me to look up. It was one of my grandfather's personal guards. His expression was cold, professional, stripped of all humanity. "Bring her back," he said. "Grandfather wants it handled immediately." Handled. That was the word they used for livestock, not people. When they took me through the palace gates, no one looked at me. No one questioned where I had been. No one asked if I was safe. They only asked the one question I feared. How far along was I? The answer 6 months sent ripples of horror through the family. What followed was not screaming or slapping or emotional hysteria. It was worse. Silence. Cold, calculating silence. My aunts whispered behind doors. Uncles argued in hushed tones. Scholars were summoned. Legal documents appeared. Medical advisors arrived. Then came the verdict. "The child must be removed," one of the scholars said. "It cannot be allowed to live. The purity of the bloodline must be restored." They did not look at me when they said it. It was as if I wasn't even in the room. My father was there. He stood in the corner, his face pale and drained. He said nothing, not one word. He looked at me only once before lowering his eyes like a man watching his own execution. They took me from the council room directly to a military hospital hidden on the outskirts of Riyadh, one used for sensitive cases. The hallways smelled of disinfectant and secrecy. Every door had locks. Every window had bars. Every doctor avoided my gaze. They didn't treat me like a patient. They treated me like a problem. I remember being pushed into an operating room so cold it felt like winter. The walls were white. The lights were blinding. The table was metallic and heartless. They strapped my wrists and ankles as if I were dangerous, as if my unborn child could claw its way out and attack them. A nurse shaved a patch on my arm for the IV. Another prepared the anesthesia. I stared at the ceiling tiles, trying not to scream. My baby kicked, perhaps sensing the terror inside me. I whispered to her, hold on, please don't leave me." One of the doctors murmured, "It will be quick." Quick! As if they were doing me a favor. Tears slid down my cheeks. I wasn't a princess in that room. I wasn't even a person. I was a womb they wanted to empty. When the anesthesia mask lowered toward my face, something broke inside me. It was a kind of panic I had never felt, a wild, primal fear. a suffocating certainty that I was about to lose the only thing I had left. My voice tore out of my throat before I could stop it. "Please," I sobbed. "Someone, anyone, God, help my baby. Please, please save her." No one responded. No one moved. The mask came closer. I closed my eyes, certain I would wake up with my arms empty and my soul hollow. But instead, for the first time in my life, heaven would answer. The moment my plea left my lips, the operating room became unbearably still. It wasn't a peaceful silence, it was the kind of silence that follows a scream in the desert. The doctors didn't react. The nurses didn't flinch. They moved like machines trained to ignore humanity. My tears blurred the bright lights above me into a haze, and for a brief moment, I thought I might disappear into the numbness that was swallowing my mind. Then I felt a soft touch on my wrist. It wasn't the cold, clinical touch of a doctor. It wasn't the firm grip of a soldier. It was gentle, almost trembling. I opened my eyes, expecting another faceless nurse preparing to take my child from me. Instead, I saw a pair of warm, dark eyes beneath a surgical mask. A woman stood beside me, her expression filled with something I hadn't seen in weeks. Compassion. She leaned in, so close I could feel her breath against my ear. And in the softest whisper, so soft I almost thought I imagined it, she said, "Jesus sees you." For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. Jesus, the name struck me like lightning. No one in this palace, no one in my world ever spoke that name. It was dangerous, forbidden, a crime punishable by death. Yet here, in the middle of an operating room where they intended to end my child's life, a nurse dared to whisper it as if she were handing me a key to freedom. I blinked hard, unsure whether it was desperation or delirium. But when I looked into her eyes again, they glistened with sincerity, with urgency. She squeezed my wrist once, firmly. "You are not alone," she whispered. Before I could answer, she stepped back, returning to her station as if nothing had happened. No one else seemed to notice. No one questioned her whisper. It was as though time had paused only for her and me. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, drowning out the beeping machines. My lips trembled. I had never prayed to Jesus. I barely knew who he truly was. All I knew were the warnings. Christians were infidels. Their Bible was corrupted. Their God was false. But everything I had been taught suddenly felt like dust in my hands. My child was about to die. My soul was collapsing. Every human door had shut in my face. And now out of nowhere I received a whisper in the dark. "Jesus sees you." It wasn't logic that made me respond. It wasn't theology. It was desperation, raw, primal, aching desperation. I closed my eyes and whispered back into the void, "Jesus, if you are real, save my baby. Save her. Take me, but save her. Please, please." The anesthesiologist lowered the mask toward my face again. I braced myself, thinking those would be my final conscious moments with my daughter. But before the mask touched my skin, a loud beep pierced the room. One of the monitors flatlined. The doctor swore under his breath and rushed to the machine. Another monitor flickered. Then the overhead light flickered. The entire room vibrated with a strange electrical buzz, as if the air itself was charged. "What's happening?" one of the nurses asked. The anesthesiologist checked the plugs. "Power surge? No, everything's connected." Suddenly, every machine in the room began blinking erratically. The heart rate monitor, the fetal monitor, even the surgical lamp overhead sputtered with bursts of light. A cold draft swept across my skin, though the room had no open windows or vents. The doctors exchanged worried glances. "Shut it down," the lead surgeon barked. "We can't operate like this." A nurse rushed to the wall panel, pressing switches. Nothing changed. The lights kept stuttering. The machines kept beeping and whining in chaotic chorus. "It's malfunctioning," another doctor said. "We need to transfer her, now." The surgeon cursed. We can't delay this. The family wants it done today. The equipment isn't responding, the anesthesiologist snapped. If we continue, we could kill the mother. Kill the mother. The irony would have been laughable if I weren't strapped down like an animal awaiting slaughter. The surgeon hesitated, then threw his gloves onto the tray. Fine. Abort the procedure. Move her to holding room C. Abort the procedure. My breath hitched. My baby was still alive. For the moment, the staff began unstrapping me reluctantly, almost irritated by the inconvenience of my survival. As they wheeled me down the hallway, the fluorescent lights continued to flicker overhead, as if the entire building trembled with an unseen presence. My heart thudded with a question I was afraid to speak. Was this Jesus? They left me in a dim, empty room and shut the door. The silence was deafening. My wrists were still marked from the restraints. My belly rose beneath the thin hospital gown, and I placed both hands over it as tears streamed down my cheeks. I whispered into the shadows, Jesus, was that you? The room felt different now, like someone else was in it with me. Not visible, but undeniably there. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. The holding room they placed me in was barely larger than a closet, dim, airless, with a single metal chair and a narrow hospital bed bolted to the floor. The overhead light flickered like a dying candle, humming softly as if exhausted from resisting the darkness. The door clicked shut behind the nurse, and the sound echoed inside me like the closing of a tomb. For a while, I simply sat there, hands trembling over my belly, listening to my daughter's faint movements. Every kick was proof that she was still alive. Every kick was a rebellion against the fate they had written for us. I whispered, I'm here, little one, though my voice was barely more than a breath. I'm here. I'm not giving up. But the truth was, I didn't know how to save either of us. The hospital was surrounded by soldiers loyal to my family. The hallways were watched. I was drugged, exhausted, and terrified. Sami didn't even know where they had taken me. My father was powerless. My grandfather was merciless. There was no one left to call, no one left to trust, except that whisper, Jesus sees you. The words replayed in my mind like a song I'd never heard before, but somehow recognized. I didn't know anything about Jesus, not really. I knew him only as a forbidden figure, a prophet misinterpreted, a name we were taught never to speak with reverence. And yet, something inside me, something deeper than fear, was drawn to him the way a drowning person is drawn to air. The room felt strangely warmer, as if the stale air stirred. I closed my eyes, pressing both hands to my belly, and whispered the only prayer I knew how to pray. Jesus, if you saved us once, please come back. Please help me. Silence filled the room for a moment. Then the atmosphere shifted. It was so subtle at first, I thought it was just my imagination, a hallucination brought on by stress. But then the light overhead stopped flickering. Completely. It shone steady and pure, brighter than before, not harsh, but warm, like sunlight filtered through water. The air grew softer, almost sweet. My skin tingled. When I opened my eyes, I saw him. Or rather, I saw someone standing in the far corner of the room where the shadows used to cling like cobwebs. Now the shadows melted away around him, as if refusing to touch him. His figure was bathed in a soft, golden light, not blinding, not sharp, but gentle like dawn breaking over the horizon. I couldn't see his face clearly, yet somehow I knew he was looking straight at me, straight into me. My body should have panicked. My mind should have screamed, but instead, peace flooded me like warm water filling a cold basin. My trembling stopped. My heartbeat steadied. My breathing calmed. He stepped forward, not walking, but moving with a fluid grace that felt both human and otherworldly. As he drew closer, I noticed his hands. They were strong, gentle, and marked. There were scars, perfect, circular scars in the center of each palm, glowing faintly. My breath caught. This was not a dream. This was not imagination. This was Jesus. He knelt beside my bed, bringing his face level with mine. His eyes were unlike any eyes I had ever seen, deep, endless, full of a love so fierce and so tender it broke something open inside me. Tears spilled down my cheeks without my permission. He reached out and placed his scarred hand over my belly. The moment his skin touched mine, warmth spread through me like fire and water at the same time, purifying, comforting, overwhelming. "My beloved daughter," he said. His voice was not loud, yet it reverberated through the room, through my bones, through the parts of my soul I had buried. It sounded like a whisper and a waterfall all at once. "I have seen every tear you have cried. I have seen every moment you felt alone. You were never alone." My lips trembled. "They want to kill her," I whispered. "Please, save her." His eyes softened even more, something I didn't know was possible. "I will save her," he said gently, "and I will save you." My hands shook as I reached up, touching the air near his face, afraid to make contact, afraid he would disappear if I moved too suddenly. "Why me?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why come for me?" His smile was like light breaking through clouds. "Because you are worth saving." The warmth intensified, spreading deep into my womb. My daughter kicked strong, vibrant, alive. I gasped, pressing my hand over his. "Your child is mine," he whispered. "I formed her. I know her. No one will take her from my hands." Tears blinded me. My heart felt too full, too fragile, too overwhelmed to hold it all. And then, slowly, like a flame gently dimming, his form began to fade. But before disappearing completely, he spoke one final sentence, 5 words that would change the rest of my life forever. "Get ready. Help is coming." I stayed in that dim holding room long after the light faded and the air returned to its stale stillness. My body felt warm, my heart strangely steady, as if someone had poured peace directly into my bloodstream. I held my belly with trembling hands, still feeling the echo of Jesus' touch, still hearing his final words whispering through my mind. "Get ready. Help is coming." I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know how help could possibly reach me in a military hospital guarded by my family's soldiers. But the fear that once crushed my lungs had loosened. I wasn't brave, no. I was still terrified, but the terror no longer owned me. I wasn't alone anymore. Hours passed, maybe minutes, maybe eternity before the door cracked open quietly. I braced myself, expecting another cold-faced doctor. But instead, the same nurse stepped inside, the one who had whispered, "Jesus sees you." Her mask was pulled low now, and I could see how young she was. Her eyes, deep and gentle, were full of urgency. "My name is Kit," she said softly, "and we don't have much time." I tried to sit up, but she shook her head. "Save your strength. We need to move." "Move?" The word struck lightning through my chest. "They'll kill me if I try to leave," I whispered. She knelt beside the bed, gripping my hands. "Jesus told me last night," she said, voice trembling. "In a dream, he said, 'Go to her. I am sending you.' I didn't know if it was real until they canceled your surgery. But now I know. He is making a way." Her conviction hit me harder than the vision itself. She wasn't acting reckless or emotional, she was acting on faith. A faith so steady it felt like a rope thrown into my drowning ocean. She pulled out a folded set of clothes from beneath her scrub top loose, worn hospital garments, a hijab, and a simple worker's ID card. "Put these on, quickly." My hands shook as I changed. Kit kept glancing toward the door, listening for footsteps. When I lowered the hijab over my face, she exhaled softly. "You look like one of the cleaning staff. Keep your head down, and don't speak unless I tell you." She opened the door a sliver, checked the hallway, then motioned me out. My heart thudded violently. Every shadow felt like danger. Every footstep echoed too loudly. But something unseen seemed to move around us, carrying, shielding, pushing obstacles aside. The first miracle happened at the elevator. Normally, a guard stood right beside it. Today, the post was empty. Kit muttered a shocked prayer under her breath. Thank you, Jesus. The second miracle came as we turned toward the east wing. Surveillance cameras visible along every corridor were all blinking with the same frozen, malfunctioning blue light. System error. Read the tiny digital screens beneath each one. The third miracle happened at the exit door. A heavy metal security door that always required fingerprint clearance hung slightly open, as if someone had forgotten to close it. Kit stared at it, shaking. This never happens, she whispered. Never. We stepped into the cool night air. A white hospital van waited near the loading dock. A Filipino man in a janitor uniform sat in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel tightly. His face was pale with fear, but determined. This is Mateo, Kit said quickly. He's part of the underground church. We've helped others escape before, but never someone from the royal family. My throat tightened. Why are you risking your lives for me? Kit's answer was simple and unwavering. Because he told us to. They loaded me into the back of the van, covering me with blankets and supply boxes. The engine sputtered to life. As we drove past the final checkpoint, I held my breath, but no one stopped us. The guard didn't even glance up from his phone. We reached the outskirts of the city, then the desert. Hours blurred into a long stretch of sand and fear and whispered prayers. Every movement of my daughter inside me reminded me what was at stake. Kit kept her hand on my back the entire ride. You're almost there, she whispered. Hold on, Layla. Jordan appeared like a distant promise and then a sudden reality. Border officers inspected the van briefly, barely glancing at the forged documents Mateo handed them. One of them waved us through with a bored flick of his hand. Just like that, I crossed from captivity into freedom. The safe house was small, hidden in an old neighborhood in Amman. Christian workers washed my feet, fed me, prayed over me. 3 weeks later, in a room filled with soft singing and gentle hands, I gave birth to a perfect little girl. She entered the world crying loudly, fiercely, like a warrior. I held her against my chest, tears streaming down my face, and whispered the words that had carried me through hell. Jesus, you saved her. You saved us. In that moment, I knew no palace had ever given me anything so precious. No bloodline had ever protected me like this. No tradition had ever loved me, but Jesus did. Life in Jordan was nothing like the palace I had grown up in. There were no marble floors, no servants gliding by in silence, no guards stationed outside my door. Instead, there were small apartments with peeling paint, sunlit balconies crowded with laundry, and the noise of children playing in the streets from morning to dusk. For the first time in my life, the sounds of ordinary life felt like music. It felt like freedom. I often sat by the window of the safe house with my daughter resting against my chest, watching the city breathe. I named her Grace, not just for what Jesus had done for us, but because she was the embodiment of it. Every time I looked at her tiny fingers curled around mine, I remembered the operating table, the cold light, the despair that nearly killed us. And I remembered the warmth of his hand on my belly, the promise in his voice, the miracle that carried us out of that place. I was no longer a princess, but I had never felt more like a person. The underground church continued to care for us. They brought food, clothes, supplies, and more importantly, love. Real love. Not the duty-bound affection of a royal family, not the suffocating loyalty of bloodlines, but love born from faith, from compassion, from a God who saw me long before I ever knew his name. When I finally attended a house church gathering, I expected to feel like an outsider. Instead, I felt like someone coming home after being lost for years. The believers welcomed me with open arms. They listened to my story without judgment, their eyes full of tears and awe. When they prayed over me, I felt the same warmth I had felt in the hospital room, the unmistakable presence of Jesus surrounding me like a shelter. In time, they helped me apply for asylum. The process was long, complicated, filled with interviews and documents and endless questions. But through it all, I felt the steady hand of God guiding every step. Grace grew healthier and stronger with each passing day, a living testament of his mercy. Sometimes, late at night, when she slept peacefully beside me, I would think of my father. I hoped he was safe. I hoped one day he would find the same freedom I found. I didn't know what my family told the world about my disappearance. I didn't know what rumors were spreading. But I had stopped living for their approval long ago. I was living for the one who saw me in the darkest room of my life and said, "You are worth saving." I still carry scars, emotional ones, the kind no one can see, but Jesus heals slowly, gently. There are nights when fear tries to creep back in. There are moments when my past feels like a shadow trying to reclaim me. But then I look at Grace, and I hear Jesus' voice again. You were never alone. And I know we are exactly where we're meant to be. If you are listening to my story right now, maybe you know what it's like to feel trapped. Maybe you know what it's like to think no one hears your cries. Maybe you're standing at the edge of something unbearable, wondering if there is any way out. There is. Jesus sees you. Jesus hears you. And Jesus can step into your story just as he stepped into mine in the moment you least expect, in the place you thought he could never reach. If you need prayer, write it in the comments. You're not alone. We will pray with you, wherever you are in the world. And remember this, I lost a palace made of stone, but I gained a kingdom made of love. And that kingdom, it's open for you too.